This is Paul Nobles from Eat to Perform. I am sitting here with April Blackford. April, did you want to say hi to everyone?
Hi, everyone.
So, just wanted to talk a little bit, kind of refreshing with everyone. We did our, for members, we specifically have a meal planning group. And we've really been pushing for members. Coaches have been doing for a while where we were sharing pictures and then, our screenshots from MyFitnessPal or whatever. And what we really try to do is encourage people to go that one step further and post, their links for specific days. And so somebody has a really good recipe that they've loaded into MyFitnessPal, something like that, and they've loaded it on January 9th, that they use the link. It's a little hard to do. I'm actually in communication with MyFitnessPal, which is kind of nice. And so I'm going to talk to them a little bit about some of these problems that, it would allow, like as an example, most people find that they're not able to share this through mobile. And I think that would be really helpful considering the fact that virtually everyone is on mobile these days for everything. But we gave away 5 health boxes. I kind of let the cat out of the bag that this week we're going to be giving away a bunch of the pair of the new Speed TRs. What I think that everyone needs to understand is that as a member, what we're really just trying to do is encourage you guys to kind of do what you bought, right? You bought, some level of accountability, some level of trying to figure things out for yourself. And so, if you want to call it a bribe, you can call it a bribe, but, the active people tend to win prizes. And we didn't really tell people about the health boxes because we knew that that was going to be a really sought after one. I will tell you guys this, those aren't the only health boxes that we're going to be giving away. But it's not going to be specific to meal planning. And I've already said too much. So I'm going to kind of leave that out there. But it has been cool, getting kind of this level of excitement going. I feel like more than any other time before in Eat to Perform land, that customers have understood where we were coming from. And I think that some of that is we've gotten a lot of feedback and we've learned how to communicate better with people. And part of it is things like this webinar. And part of it is the people using fundamentals. I'm telling you guys, if you're a member and you're not using fundamentals, or you're a lifetime member and you're not using the quick start classes, you really should, because really a lot of good stuff happens there. And
my good news is that my fundamentals class tomorrow is completely slam booked.
Yeah. Well, I got bad news for you, or I think one of the things that sort of frustrates me with fundamentals, and maybe we can address this using webinars or something like that, but people don't show up, So 25 people sign up, and then only 17 people show up. So that means that 8 people that could have been there, it's sort of frustrating. I get it. Sometimes people have things that come up, but I mean, they could cancel, if they figure that out, and then they're not taking the spot from someone else. So something to think about when we're talking about the fundamentals. I know, sometimes people get all haughty about that and go, well, I bought this and, just because I didn't use it. But think of it from the standpoint of somebody that's just starting off, right? That needs the help, I think that can be super, super helpful. Anything that you can think of right off the bat? I mean, like I know it really is. In some ways, it's really exciting because we've got so many people to deal with, and we're, virtually everything that we're doing is working right now. So that's a positive.
Working is good whenever we're changing lives. So
yeah, it's really cool. I'm going to actually be meeting up with April in Greensboro, North Carolina, for the War of the Wads. I don't know how I'm going to do. I should probably talk a little bit about what I've been doing as part of this Just Getting Started series, where I've been doing kind of exercise throughout the day, because I think that people are very interested in that, and they should be very interested in it because it's kind of a cool way of doing it. So we'll talk about food perfection, and then we'll talk about taking a long, slower approach with the exercise. So I'm just writing notes so I don't forget. But yeah, the courses where we're able to kind of have classes, it's fairly obvious that is going to be the direction that we go, in 2016 and prepping for 2017. So two stories. One, I was talking to Susie today. She was helping me. Sarah was busy with her son at the orthodontist today. So I believe that Susie said that her grandfather was a mayor of Bossier City. I've talked in the past about poker and poker stories. One of the best poker stories I've ever had. It's really interesting because I've played poker with a lot of people, and one of the guys that made a really big impression on me was the guy that played Luther on Coach, Jerry Van Dyke, Dick Van Dyke's brother. And Jerry Van Dyke at the time lived outside of Texarkana, Texas, or Arkansas. Well, it's like right there. And he liked to play poker. And this was way before, anything where, like poker exists now, right? There was no limit poker. It was mostly limit poker. And I was probably a couple years into my journey. I was not a very good poker player at that point, not as good as I became, but I played fairly significant stakes for that time. For that time, 30, 60, or 50, 100 was like a lot of money. And later on, the games became much bigger. Someone's asking, is there an agenda for this webinar? The theme for this webinar is we're going to talk about avoiding food perfection, and then we're going to talk a little bit about why, how you can vary your exercise and get in more volume. And so we'll kind of address that afterwards. But we also, this is the podcast, and so we try to keep it relatively entertaining. If you're listening to the podcast right now, and April doesn't know this, but almost 1,000 people download it immediately. I mean, it's kind of unreal how many people listen to it. And so if you're not a member, you don't know that there's 50 members listening to these conversations. And sometimes I'll ask questions, like Robin's actually talking about the living with a Navy SEAL. And she's talking about how she feels like a wuss with her workouts, and she's asking me how to push it harder. So I'll bring that up as I'm talking about my experiences in the last week, and I'll talk a little bit about how I'm varying my exercise. So I was going to Bossier City to play poker with Jerry Van Dyke. And when Jerry Van Dyke would show up, he wasn't a great poker player. So a lot of other poker players would show up. Some were better than me, some weren't as good as me. But in general, if you have one or two bad players, he's a great guy, he's just a bad poker player, right? Funniest dude I've ever played poker with by far, and so, which I guess isn't too surprising, but I've played poker with Michael Jordan. I've played poker with, a lot of, sitcom people. And for him to be the funniest of all of them, I think Ray Romano, Brad Garrett, like a lot of those types of people. So we were playing, and there was this guy named Keith Lear. And Keith was kind of an action guy. Like he just was like a gambler. And what was funny about Keith is that I think he was really good at like pot limit games and really good when the stakes got high, and was kind of a bluffing guy and things of that nature. But he liked to make the game. And later on, I sort of learned, I actually became friendly with Keith. I wouldn't say that we were friends, but we've talked online, things of that nature. But a lot of what I learned from Keith, I don't think he, when poker moved to like pot limit, no limit, that suited Keith a little bit more. Limit poker really wasn't his thing because it requires a little bit more patience, a little bit more, just kind of waiting and folding and stuff like that. And so that worked out okay for me because I was kind of see-through at that point. I wasn't particularly a good poker player, but in the presence of a lot of bad poker players, I could win. So Keith and Jerry, it's literally the first hand. We're all like unracking our chips. And I mean, you wouldn't buy into this game with less than $5,000 in chips. So I think I bought in for $5,000. Most people had $10,000 to $20,000 sitting in front of them, and it was funny because it wasn't really even that big of a game. It was only I believe it was only 30-60, but I could be wrong. It might have been something like 5,100 or 8,160 or something of that nature. So the chips start flying. And Jerry and Keith go back and forth. And you could look at the board and you could see that why, but I'm kind of frozen. But you could see that there was a straight out there. And so it was fairly clear to everyone, including Keith, that Jerry had a made hand, and when it got to be heads up, you could basically go till one person stopped, and clearly at this point neither of them would stop. I think at one point Jerry stopped, right past right past the flop, because he started realizing like he was just going to put in all his money. Keith wasn't going to stop gambling. Then on the turn, nothing changed. Jerry's still betting. Keith's still raising. Eventually, Keith gets him to stop. On the river, Keith makes a small straight, but Jerry still has the big straight. And they're going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And Keith or Jerry, Luther from Coach, like looks at his hand so many times, there's just no way he doesn't have it, right? Because he just keeps checking to make sure that he didn't misread his hand over and over again. And Keith has literally put thousands of dollars in the very first hand we were playing. And at one point, Jerry says to him, he's like, I'm not going to stop raising. I have the best hand. He goes, maybe we have the same hand and we could just get all of our chips in. He goes, but I don't know why you're doing this. And then Keith looks at him and says, well, I'm doing it because I don't want to seem like a pussy. And Jerry's like, okay, fine. you know. So Jerry actually stops. He he has the best hand. He knows that Keith's not going to stop for some reason. And he just turns over his hand. He's got the winning hand. Keith folds. I mean, still to this day, I don't remember a pile of chips that big. And I've played in poker games all over the world. And so Jerry is raking in his chips, right? And as he's raking in his chips, he said to Keith, he looks at him, he said, well, boy, I'm just going to tell you one thing. He said, you might be a lot of things, but one thing you ain't is a pussy. I mean, you have to imagine this guy like pulling in all these chips. And so I apologize for the profanity, but truthfully, like the story isn't the same if you don't use the exact words. The other story I was going to say, I've been kind of meaning to say this one. We were talking about, older cars and like the life that we all used to live and stuff like this. And one time my wife and I, we drove down to Louisiana to visit my family. And at one point, I stopped driving and she, actually, you know what? I'm going to hold off on this story because it's actually a little bit longer, but it's pretty funny. And we sort of need to get on to the topic at hand. So the other day, we've been posting a few things and we're getting a lot of interest from people that do, MyFitnessPal and some of the tricks that we're putting out there related to food scales, related to like keeping food fresh, Instapot, things of that nature. People are really, really liking that content. And so if you're looking at making HBTV videos, Instapot videos would be very, very popular. But one of the things that someone said right off the bat, and we can talk about different contexts because this actually comes up a lot, is we were talking about salads and the person was talking about keeping their salads fresh and she was using a plastic container and, for the most part, everyone was finding it really helpful and literally thousands of people viewed it and found it really interesting. But one person, of course, says, too bad it's wrapped in all that plastic. I think that the problem that you run into, and people will say this about microwaving food, Instapot is really steam, so I don't think people are really going to say that too much. But, who knows, man? People, here's the problem with what that person is saying. Is it better to eat nothing rather than eating something that is pure? I think everyone, including the person making the video, would argue that, fresh greens right out of the garden would be great to eat, are going to have more nutrients, things of that nature. But you can't always do that. And so allowing for some things that have some convenience is sort of like people that are so super against. And I really think that a lot of this comes from the rigid background, where people believe that the answer is related to the rigidity. And because of that, they're really putting out, this message, and they're excluding so many people. As someone with a family of 4, I have a small family, but there's still times where I want to be able to get in a salad and I don't want to have to go to a garden, fight a rabbit, you know what I'm saying? Like all these different things, to make sure that my food is pure and so it doesn't have chemicals on it and stuff like that. Of course, organic food is probably something that you should pursue, but is that better than having rotting food? You see where I'm going with that, April? I think that, if you can afford organic food and you can go to the grocery store, awesome, okay? But not everybody can. And, you say, well, they could make it a bigger priority in their life. The science really isn't on your side. The science really isn't on the side of the food purity people. Certainly, a diet of mostly meats and veggies is going to be positive, and don't misconstrue. See, that's the problem, where that's the discussion we're having, is getting too caught up in food perfection that you paint yourself into a corner and you don't do reasonable things. And so one example, we had a coaching client, and she had a death in the family. And she was asking, some of the strategies that she should have had, because there was just a bunch of funeral food. And what would I have done differently? And I said, I wouldn't have done anything differently. There are times where there's no food available and you just have to eat Subway. There are times where, certainly you could make Subway work for your life. You know what I mean? This kind of food demonization thing, is kind of a net negative, and ultimately distracts. And so you end up painting yourself into a corner. Same thing with sort of microwaving food, right? The narrative was always that, microwaving food took the nutrients out of it. That's not true. Would it be better, once again, to eat a certain amount of raw foods, a certain amount of, things that kind of look like it just came out of nature? I would argue that yes, it would. I mean, most people don't know that one of the biggest changes in my life was embracing juicing, and the impact that had on me in regards to changing my palate and making vegetables a bigger part of my life. And when I did that, that was a game changer. But I was coming from a relatively unhealthy background. I think what sort of happens, and people send me things and they say, well, what do you think about this? And I was listening to this Harvard guy talk, and there's nothing wrong about what he was saying, right? He's like, in the nutrition science department at Harvard, and, I'm sure the science of what he was saying was awesome. But it always is based on relatively sedentary people that don't do very much. When you can up your amounts of food, the sheer amount of food gets you more vitamins. Let me just say that again, because that's important. Is people that undereat are often deficient in vitamins simply because they're not having enough nutrition, in their overall food intake. And so some of what people argue as it relates to being, pro-fat, what's sort of interesting is that because we mention moderate carbohydrates, we get kind of labeled as, carbohydrate and against fat. And we're certainly not against fat. In fact, we believe that your activity should allow enough room for both fats and carbohydrates. So I'm going to hand this off to April, because I know that April, in the past, you've been vegetarian. You probably had the most beautiful Whole Foods that I'd ever seen when we first met.
I still have them.
Yeah, but you were sort of caught up in the food purity thing for a while, and your mentality changed a little bit, right? I mean, am I reading that incorrectly?
I would have to say that in regards to the food purity, I believe, I agree with what you're saying. I do agree that, if you can afford organic or you can afford fresh, obviously it's, I think it would probably be a little better for you. But if you can't, anything's better than nothing. Don't avoid eating salads just because you can't afford to go to Whole Foods and pay $6 for a head of organic kale or lettuce or, whatever. I highly agree about the fact that when someone undereats, you don't get an adequate amount of micronutrients. And I do highly believe in getting variety, having a variety of colors in your diet. And not everything's going to be in season, so, some things you may have to buy frozen or, whatever to get some variety in. I do think variety is very, very important, kind of like bodybuilders who just eat chicken, rice, broccoli 5 meals a day, every single day, all year long. That's just not an adequate amount of, variety, of foods in general. So I do agree there. And you were talking about the dietary fats. A lot of people don't. We are definitely not anti-fat, by no means.
Right.
But obviously you need the adequate amount of dietary fats for healthy hormone function. But we just don't. We just kind of aren't in the boat of, taking 3 shots of MCT oil and going and working out and maybe being on the verge of pooping your pants or
I mean, I'm trying not to be embarrassed because you're basically calling me out, April, but yeah, that did happen to me once.
I tried it one day, and once I had the gurgling, it just wouldn't work. But again, with the fats, it's all about variety. You want the variety, the balance of all different, the monounsaturated and the polyunsaturated fats. So I do agree with that. For me, whenever I was vegetarian for 5 years, I kind of looked at, veggies were my, they were my protein. They were my, which I will say that during that time, I was not carb deficient by any means, so.
Well, most vegetarians tend to be fruitarians, right? Because they need energy, and so they tend to be over reliant on, things like rice or things like fruits, which isn't, certainly isn't bad. I mean, I actually love the fact that we have a growing vegetarian and even vegan contingent as part of Eat to Perform, because I just feel like, excluding people, it's sort of like what we're talking about here, is that, if you can afford, organic foods, or you can eat fresh out of the garden because there's a farmer, making the food for you, that's awesome. That's great for you. I mean, I'm super, super happy for you. But I think it gets to this point of kind of elitism with it. And it's not very inclusive to people that don't have those, advantages. And I think just because, I CrossFit, or just because I can eat fresh food, or just, any of the things that kind of cause people to be elitist about whatever it is that they do, I just think that, you're maybe missing the boat. I mean, I can give actually a real quick anecdote to that. There was a doctor that we were playing poker with, and this wasn't a game that I was in, but the doctor drew out on this guy and kind of put a bad beat on him, which you guys probably, not everybody knows what that means, but the guy really started to talk to him negatively and say, you idiot, why could you do that? And this guy is like a surgeon, well, not 2 hours later, that guy has a heart attack, and then the doctor saves his life, right? So it turns out he wasn't that big of an idiot after all. I think that that's what happens with food. I think that we get to a point where we paint ourselves in a rigid corner, and, like Dr. Phil says, how's that working for you? You probably wouldn't be listening to this right now if it worked for you real well, right? And so just allowing for that little bit of flexibility. I mean, even, Dr. Cordain, in the Paleo Solution originally, almost every single diet out there agrees that 80% adherence is fine. And I really think that, the people that turned all those different messages into this really rigid message, you know, in the wrong hands can end up looking sort of like an eating disorder.
Honestly, I think any plan, nutrition, training, any type of plan that has a rigidness to it is just not sustainable. You're setting yourself up, to disappoint yourself or to feel like you're a failure if something happens. Like I've worked with some people who, and I used to be the same way, how you have the rigid training schedule, that you're going these exact days, you're doing this exact program. And when life gets in the way and you can't go, it's like your whole week is ruined. It's all ruined, it's all screwed up.
Right.
And that's just not a normal life to live. I tell my husband daily, I'm 38 years old. I would like to hope and pray that I'm going to live till I'm like 98. But even if I do live to 98, I've only got 50 more years left. And then that's it,
Well, math is not your friend there. You would have 60 more years. But I get your point.
Yeah, no, you're right. You're right.
Like,
wait a minute. Oh, you got me on that one. But what I'm saying is do you want to spend your life, stressing out over food or over, your, just the rigidness in your life, things that sometimes you just can't control? Or do you want to, sometimes roll with the punches and make the best of what you have?
Now, before we move on to like the next part where we talk about, the exercise, I don't particularly eat with a lot of variety. And so I think that there are some times where, if you're new to meal planning, it might make some sense to try and have some order. I think there are other times where, not in a super rigid way, but if you've established your metabolism, you've normalized things a bit, and you still have fat to use, kind of sticking to the plan is fairly important. And I think that, a lot of people listening to the message that we're saying, I made a post actually talking about mindset and how mindset will often, kind of hold people back. And what I meant is your family loves you, right? Your husband loves you. You're surrounded by a bunch of people that are super positive, similar to the people at Eat to Perform, and you're surrounded by a bunch of people, at your gym that are really supportive. But at the end of the day, from a health perspective, it might make some sense to lose, some weight, right? If you're morbidly obese, you probably should still have that as a goal. I think mindset can sort of stick you there. So what we're not saying is get comfortable, where you're at, I do believe that you should be comfortable in your own skin, and I think every journey should start there. But don't neglect your goals going, well, April and Paul said, I can have some level of flexibility. April's talking about variety. I do try to have variety. I try to, when I'm out to eat, I'll have, dense green salads, certainly have, some level of variety. But most days I eat kind of the same thing. I mean, like, if you guessed 3 things on what I'm going to eat on Tuesday, you're going to be right a lot, because I eat similar stuff over and over again. And that's just the way that my life works. The last thing I'm going to say there is that I know a lot of people don't drink milk and dairy products. And this time of year, vitamin D is so important. And we're sitting here, I'm in my basement. I think it's -4 degrees outside right now, and so, I'm finding that if I don't get really serious about my vitamin D, it's really sort of messing me up. Any thoughts before we move on to kind of the exercise thing?
I just wanted to add that the variety I was referencing was to Whole Foods. I was just talking about the rigidness of, some people it's an all or nothing, and then when they don't perfect it, it's, they get stressed out and they want to quit. I do think that you had a good point in regards to with someone just starting out, if they're food prepping and planning, meal planning, things like that, having a basic structure, of a few foods that you rotate would be a great idea just to get into a comfortable groove and routine of, getting to your targets. And then once you, kind of practice that for a while, then you can start adding in more variety. I do think that that's good. I kind of thought we should probably bring up the, of course, this may be the deadly topic that we don't want to strike up, but, we get asked like daily about the sugar.
Yeah. I mean, like the sugar thing is sort of tiring. I mean, I don't even think it really requires a lot of attention. There was one person that was asking, she's like, you guys are nailing it 100%. I found myself trying to be perfect with food, and it's always been a barrier. I'll just go ahead and tell you, I probably eat Chipotle 3 times a week. So she was asking me, what do I do related to food perfection? That's one of the things that I do is I allow for kind of a slower food option, where you can get a decent amount of protein. A little high in sodium, but that really doesn't matter for me because I'm fairly athletic. So the more athletic stuff you do, sodium isn't as big of a deal, but we do look at a lot of food logs. There's a lot of sausages in there, and there's a lot of things like that. And so, some people will retain a lot of water.
I started to say, in regards to the sodium topic, I think some people are much more sensitive than others are. And to add, sausage is like one of the best foods on earth, but you can't eat it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and not wake up with sausage fingers. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah. I just want to clear up the whole sugar thing. We're not pro sugar. Like, we're not, like if you eat 40% of your calories in sugar, that's probably going to be a real negative. The problem is that people go, well, they're pro carbohydrate, and carbohydrate turns to glucose, which is sugar. It's got an OS at the end of it. Okay, that sort of misses the overriding point, and all you're really trying to do is make an argument that really is not founded in science. A lot of people will argue that your body doesn't need carbohydrates, that it can make it. Okay, but it's relatively inefficient at doing that. I mean, it is doing it on some level right now. In my body, right now, on some level, it's doing it. But providing your body with an adequate amount of starches so you can perform athletically, potentially keeping the tissue that you're breaking down within your workouts and building newer, stronger tissue along the way. When people talk about fat loss, they don't often focus on, see, that's where the sugar narrative, that's really where the sugar narrative is. It's just, well, first of all, I've taken out all refined sugars. Okay, awesome. How's that going? Well, I lost some weight initially. So now, I'm going to cut out all my fruit. It's assuming that the less narrative, right? It's not about sugar. It really isn't about sugar for you. It's about calories, and your assumption is that fewer calories is always the answer. We're pro starch. We're pro moderation. We believe that you should be able to eat sugar, at times and not be overly weird about it. It's sort of like what we were talking about with food perfection. I think that's why April brought it up, and I think this is a good time for that topic. But if you're asking me, I mean, I'll just go ahead and say it. I mean, I've been kind of like staying away from this for a while, but I was at a Whole30 seminar. Okay, this was 7, 8 years ago when Rob Wolf got kicked out of CrossFit and Whole30 started to take over. And so I was, actually pretty turned out I was pretty smart at nutrition even at that point, because it was the second day of a 2-day seminar, and I had been talking to Melissa and Dallas, who were running the seminar, and the people that started Whole30. And I brought in some dark chocolate, and Dallas was like totally cool with it, like no big deal at all. Melissa lost it. I mean, like started talking like in a high pitched voice and stuff like this, and I go, I don't get it. Like, what's the big deal? And she's like, well, dark chocolate's got sugar in it. I was like, actually, this dark chocolate is 90%, and the only sugar in it is from strawberries, which isn't really super high anyway. I said, you've been telling me about fats this whole seminar. Dark chocolate is mostly fat. So any spike that I might get from the infinitesimal amount of sugar would be blunted by the fat from the chocolate. I said, how is it possible that 10% is being, highlighted when from a physiological standpoint, it makes no sense at all. And she didn't really have a good answer for that. And at that point, I started realizing I might want to start my own company at some point, because that seems like something somebody should know. And I know that dark chocolate has become more acceptable. At that point, Whole30 was even, I don't know if it was more rigid than it is now. They've become more accepting of a few things, but in general, there's always this kind of like food perfection narrative. And I'm not about like attacking Whole30. I could give a shit. I mean, like, they have their customers, we have our customers. It's fine. I think in general, the whole meats and veggies thing, I'm for that. And if you were eating like a moron and you start eating meats and veggies, that's probably a good thing. But I think, like, systems like Whole30 assume that everybody eats like a moron. And then anybody that's struggling, the more rigid they can be, the better. I was already lean. I had already lost a lot of weight. I was very active. And so for me to have, to be hungry and to eat, but I mean, it was pretty funny. I'm pretty sure I've told April this story before. I've told a few people this story before, but that gave me a clue, like, that I did not want to be aligning with those guys.
I had a it's a current coaching client, but I did one-on-one with her about a year ago, and I remember talking to her on the telephone, and she was telling me her nutrition history and things that she had done and so forth and so on. And she said, she participated in some challenges at her gym, and initially she saw some results, and then it gradually faded. And she said, I was asking, what the challenges entailed. And she said, well, we would do, normal, challenges where you, restrict starches, no, potatoes, white potatoes, things like that, pretty much strict paleo. She said, well, then we would do strict challenges. I said, well, what exactly is a strict challenge compared to the non-strict? She said, well, you weren't allowed to eat fruit. She said, you couldn't eat fruit. You couldn't eat any potatoes, any rice, nothing. Basically, all you could eat was, you couldn't eat carrots. You couldn't eat anything that had natural sugars to it. And I was just blown away. And I was like,
Eat to Perform started because of one of those challenges.
And I was blown away.
Just like that at the gym that I was working out at. And I was trying to explain to everyone, and no one, well, I had a group of people that would listen to me, but there was about 5 to 10 people, And then when they got their body fat test results, it was awful, and it turned into a train wreck when I said to them, hey, remember when I was telling you guys that super rigid isn't the way to go? And, not everybody wanted to hear that, so I started blogging about it. Now, I already knew April at this point, and, within months, she had kind of joined me, and then we started building this thing together. But, yeah, I mean, no, that's very real. No Larabars, no butter. There was like
just in general, just some blueberries or some strawberries. That is grown naturally from the earth. It has vitamins and antioxidants in it, and fiber. And things that you need in your diet. But I don't know why that would ever be considered bad.
Well, if you own a gym, right, and you're trying to teach people to be more physically capable as an answer to their overall solution, why the extreme less narrative? You know what I mean? And that's where I think it kind of gets to be a little negative.
It was actually that challenge for her that sent her seeking for something better when she found Eat to Perform, and she's been here over a year ever since.
I mean, thank you, all of those challenges, because it would not exist if it weren't for you, right? I mean, the good majority of people that show up and do Eat to Perform are like, I've tried everything, and then they find a home here, right? So I just want to talk a little bit because, I've been talking about this book, Living with a Navy SEAL. I think the guy's named Jesse Inser. His wife is the owner of, or started Spanx. I think her name's Sarah Blakely. They have a Navy SEAL that lives with them for 30 days in an effort for him to get into shape so he can do this ultra marathon. And so he puts them through all these like extreme challenges. And as I was reading it, I mean, like Robin is saying, it's very motivating because you start to realize like you could be doing so much more. But one of the things that they talk about in the book that is really enlightening is just throughout the day doing 20 push-ups, drop and give me 20, right? And then by the end of the day, the guy had done 500, push-ups. And so I was like, this is exactly my ticket. And because it's been a little hard to get to the gym on occasion. And then something comes up. And right now I need to train for this competition. Now, I've been pretty religious about my Airdyne sprint, so my breath is good. I mean, I don't know if it's like Uber CrossFit good, but it'll be fine. I think we're going to be competing, in a Masters event, and it's not going to be super strenuous. But I think the first day I did about 400 to 500 push-ups. I wasn't really paying that much attention. Then I started to add them kind of almost as challenges. So what Robin was asking is, how do you come up with these? And basically, what I do is I come up with, it's not really super well thought out. I mean, it's really, I have good work capacity. I will say to you guys that I have a superpower, and I heal really well. I recover very, very well. When I was in a motorcycle accident, I recovered I was off pain medication in 2 days. The doctor was like, what the, I mean, he was very blown away by that. So the next day I did 1,000 lunges, 100 at a time. I did 50 on each leg all at once. So what a lot of people don't realize is when you do a lunge, right, you got one leg and then another leg, and then you do your lunges, and all of a sudden it adds up to 100. The problem is that you don't get as good muscle activation doing it that way, because alternating the leg allows you for some level of rest. So when I do my lunges, I just do the one leg 50 at a time. And yes, you feel it, you know. People were like, "You're not going to be able to walk." I'm not going to lie to you. When I sat down on the toilet, you know, or any chair, I guess I probably could have used. Maybe the toilet was TMI, but sat in a chair, you know, I felt it. But you know, you have to realize that, you know, I've been exercising for years, and now, you know, I've built up this work capacity. The next day's challenge was much harder. I did 240 pull-ups, 240 dead hang pull-ups, no kipping, you know, 5 at a time. And I thought, you know, that it would be okay. My hands are starting to feel better, but your grip, like my grip around 180 pull-ups was like insane. You know, everyone thought that the lunges thing was going to be hard because that's something that they do often, but they don't do 240 pull-ups often. The 240 pull-ups was a lot harder than the lunges. Am I sore afterwards? Not as much as the lunges, you know, just because it's not like a muscle activation, delayed onset muscle soreness thing. But then the next day, I did abs. I will say I stopped halfway through, and you know, this is just something that I know that you guys might not know about yourself. But you don't want to strain your abs. My biceps, as an example, are a little tender from doing all the pull-ups, but I can deal with that. If you strain your abs, you're done for a while, right? And so what I was doing, I initially was going to do 1,000 sit-ups, and I was really working a lot of my upper body. And so I switched to 50 sit-ups and then 100 flutter kicks so I could get more of that lower abdomen work. Flutter kick is basically you have your hands, you know, kind of, you can actually do it without your hands, but I like having my hands to sort of protect my lower back. And then you're basically just hovering your feet going back and forth. Like if you can see, your feet would go like this, and then I would just count to 100. And you know, you know, flutter kicks is like one of the worst named exercises ever, you know, because it sounds so easy, but it really, really hurts. Then the other thing that I started doing, you know, because another really good exercise for your lower abs is dragon flags. Now, if you don't know what a dragon flag is, you can YouTube it. It's fairly extreme. I would say if you don't have a really strong core, you know, don't try dragon flags right now. You know, I do have a really strong core, and so basically, you know, what you do is you sort of raise your legs up in the air, and then you gradually, you know, bring your legs down just off of the force of holding your abs tight. And you know, I posted a YouTube video in the Science Lab Off Topic the other day, but I was doing them in front of my wife, and she was like, "Oh my God," you know, there's just some things that, like, I don't even know that I can do, but you know, you built up this work capacity. Jenna is sort of teasing me because she's saying that you were so sore. I knew it. I will tell you guys that I was sore, and but I'm not gonna tell you guys that I'm sore. Just like my wife, you know, my wife was like complaining the whole time. You know, she did like this lat exercise, and she's like, "I've been sore for 4 days," and she's been complaining about it for 4 days. I did 1,000 lunges, you know, like my legs were on fire, but there is no advantage to complaining. There is no advantage to being that person, you know, and I do kind of feel like, you know, I'm everyone's example to just suck it up, you know, that sometimes it just hurts, you know, sometimes that hurt is actually what will make you progress over time. Um, and so, once I got to, you know, I think it was at 500 flutter kicks and then 250 sit-ups, and then I probably did like 10 to 15 dragon flags. I decided, you know, I'd already had enough ab workout. So I think what I'm going to be doing the next week, and this is sort of what they talk about in the book, is you start to kind of put it together. Like one of the things was nickels and dimes. Is 10 minutes, every minute on the minute, 5 pull-ups, and then 10 push-ups. I have to say that, you know, being strict about my pull-ups when I was doing, you know, 20, and kind of getting my hands, you know, at the lower parts of my lats, and really doing a very strict push-up felt really good, and something that I want to continue to progress on. Because let's be honest, I mean, like, you can do that anywhere, right? You have to have a bar. You know, I don't care where you work. There's a conference room that nobody's in right now. You can, you know, bust out 20 push-ups, you know? And so that's what I'm really trying. What I'm really trying to do is kind of emphasize to the people that are just getting started, you know, do something. And so like in Robin's case, she might not be able to do strict push-ups, you know? So knee push-ups, you know, in the case of pull-ups, you know, rows are really good. That's actually why Vicky is sore, is because she's starting to realize that, you know, that the pull-up is a lot of lat activation. And so if you can get, you know, do rows, that will be helpful for your pull-up progressions. Let's see. Marilyn was saying I joined EDP right after completing Whole 30. Yeah, you know, I think that you know, that's sort of the way things are. You know, we see a lot of people that have lost a lot of weight, as an example, and then they use us as a way of reversing out of that behavior. And you know, I'll tell you, you know, I would highly encourage anyone that, you know, has a lot of fat to use, you know, if, you know, we're not the only way out there. And so, you know, if you did it and you were a little more restrictive than we would have probably liked, and did a little faster than we would have probably liked, that's fine. You can still reverse out of it, you know, fine. It just might take you a little bit longer, and, you know, there might be a little bit more of a price to pay. So Robin's saying, oh, honey, I can do strict push-ups. Actually, I did see Robin's video where she did that pull-up that one time. It is overhead squats that have me befuddled. I'll tell you, you're not the only one in terms of overhead squats. I'm not a huge fan of the fact that, you know, there's such an emphasis on Olympic lifting for athletes that are my age, close to 50. You know, I think if you're 26, you know, you want an Olympic lift, that's fine. I just feel like powerlifting is a better base for a lot of people. They could get, you know, more in.
I think Robin is the one that posted the workout that she was concerned about going in and doing today. And I remember replying, because she was kind of torn on if she should go. And I was like, I can pretty much guarantee you that you're not going to be able to walk for about 4 or 5 days. It had like 100 overhead squats and like your 3 rep max on good mornings. Like, who maxes out on good mornings? Like, that's just not a movement you would normally, you know, like do the max amount of weight on. And some other stuff. But I was like, I can guarantee you probably will be crippled for quite a few days doing that.
Well, Robin just challenged me saying that she could kick my butt on sit-ups. That might be that. That might be a check I need to cash, Robin. I'm just going to tell you that because
I'm gonna have to challenge you that the next time you're gonna have to pull out the devil's wheel. Do about 400 or 500 on the ab wheel.
Oh, April, we've done this before, haven't we? Like you know that I can do an ab wheel from a standing position.
I can too. I think we should post a video of like 200 of them. The video is gonna be cutting, and then it's gonna be like a cut in the video, and then it starts up again. But our clothes are gonna change.
I think the video is gonna be like edited from your perspective, so you actually did it when you actually didn't do it. I'm willing. You bring your ab wheel and let's videotape it in Greensboro, North Carolina, because I think you're bluffing.
I'm not bluffing. That's kind of like Tom. Sometimes he works out in the garage, and as soon as I walk out there to check up on him, he's like, doing bench press, and he's like 99, 100. I'm like, oh, okay.
Everybody wants to see Sit Up Challenge 2016. So yeah, I'm down. I don't know. I get bored with those kinds of challenges because people are like, do 100 burpees a day, and
you challenged me to that years ago. The 100 burpees a day for a month.
Yeah, that was crazy.
It was freaking horrible.
We switched though, as I recall. We switched where we started off because it was like wrecking your shoulders.
Yes, and I think we lasted like a week.
Yeah, but I ended up doing it for the whole month, but we ended up switching to air squats to give our shoulders some rest. So Paulo's saying when most of the available fat to use is visceral fat, the workout meals approach should change, or is it just going to take more time? Yeah, I think in terms of visceral fat, one, it's sort of hard to know what is visceral fat, but if you're carrying an excessive amount of fat, certainly that you're probably a little bit more likely to have excessive visceral fat. I think that when the focus is fat, you won't get there. When the focus is activity and becoming a better athlete, most of your best athletes don't have a whole lot of visceral fat, right? And so in my view, working on work capacity and trying to establish some better, healthier habits is going to be a real plus. Most of the, when I had a lot of visceral fat, and I don't now, I've done DEXA scans, things of that nature. But when I had a lot of visceral fat, I knew why I had a lot of visceral fat. There was no real secrets. I was not doing very much, and I was eating like a moron. If you have a lot of visceral fat, there's one component missing. You might have kind of cleaned up your diet and eating mostly whole foods and things of that nature. But to really get to that part where, you're building more lean tissue, that's the other thing. Like listening to this thing, it just drives me crazy because, when people talk positively about dietary fat, I don't disagree with them, but they never seem to want to talk about activity. And if they do talk about activity, they never talk about resistance training. And to me, if we're talking about replacing fat with lean tissue, you have to talk about resistance training, right? And so I think that'll be part of the equation. All right, you guys. Well, we took a few questions there, but it is past 8 o'clock. We're going to shut this down. It was a great call. I thought this was a good one. I think that in terms of like just setting people up for realistic expectations, this would be a good call. And you guys asked a lot of good questions. So we'll talk to you guys later, and we'll see you in the forums. Bye now.
Good night, everybody.